Awesome. So here we go, and welcome to our spring session. We are so excited to actually bring some of this information and the content that we are going to present today about some of the teaching skills that matter. So this is our content and connection series. So if you have seen the email, which I am sure several of y'all have, just kind of with what Tina has sent out, we are going to have something every month. This will be going on until June. So if you want to participate in this, you are more than welcome. But we're ready to start off with our civics education. That's going to be the topic of today's webinar. And these sessions are brought to you through Propel, wow. Rebecca, there we go. Here we go. NMHED funded leadership project. So that is very important. My name is Meriah Guillen. My camera is not on right now because I have caught a bug and I tried to look alive and that did not work. So I'm going to keep my camera off just for y'all's sanity. We're good right there. But I'm Meriah Guillen. I am a AE instructional coordinator at Clovis Community College, and I have been was part of the TSTM cohort that was in, I believe, 2020, 2021. And on this session, we also have Bill and Rebecca, and I'm going to let them quickly introduce themselves as well.
Hi, my name is Bill Hladky. I teach HSE at Western New Mexico University, and I'm currently doing it online, synchronously and asynchronously.
And my name, sorry, Bill, were you done?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, great. And my name is Rebecca Sherry. I am an ESL instructor for CNM here in Albuquerque, which is Central New Mexico Community College. And I am also one of the coordinators for Propel.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, one of the things that we're not going to do, I know if you have joined in any of the TSTM webinars that we have done in the past, we have really talked about just a little bit of everything. Well, this session or this term, we're going to really focus on the 5 content areas, which today is the civics education. And we're going to dive into that. So before we even start, we have 3 questions. And I know we had wanted to do breakout groups since we are having a little bit of trouble with the sounds and people speakers. I think we're just going to leave it open to the chat, or if you would like to hop on, if your microphone is working, you can hop on and answer these questions. But why is civics education important to your students? How are you presenting this information to your students? And what do you need to teach this content area better to your students? So we just want you to reflect right quick, and we know we haven't presented any information, but we want you to think about what are you doing currently right now that you consider civics education, and how is it important? So we're just going to leave it open. We're going to do this for maybe 5-10 minutes. We want to hear from you. We want this to be interactive. So if you want to write it in the chat, and then Rebecca or Bill, they can let us know what you say, or if you want to turn on your microphone and answer some of these questions, feel more than able to do so.
Well, I think the first step, and this is something that a lot of instructors don't understand sometimes, is that it is important, right, for you to also be, as an instructor, updated with civics topics. And a lot of even professional instructors, teachers at any level don't do that. So the first thing would be to role model what you want from your students. If you want your students to be involved, then you constantly need to be bringing into class, hey, did you guys hear about this? Did you guys hear about that, right? So that they start realizing how, I would say, maybe Congress or the school board or the city council affects their lives, right? That would be for number 1. And number 2 is that, but I think I want to mention last year, I think, was pretty exciting because of the success of, we were part of the advocating effort to to get that bill signed, the bill that are paying for college tuition for 5 years, right? The reach higher NM or something like that. And our students participated, signing petitions, recording videos, and we got them involved in that way. So I think it's always important to present something that it's currently ongoing, right? That it's happening, that might go in both directions, and help them figure out which position is more important for them, right? And it's gonna create a direct impact in their life. So now we can tell them, hey, college is free for 5 years, so go for it, right? Thanks to the effort that we did last year. When it comes to improving it, I think I need personally to talk more about more local issues, like housing, like school board elections, city council elections, and a lot of more local news, because the situation is always, I guess, the federal politics scenario is taking most of the attention, and I think we can do a lot of change and raise a lot of awareness if we keep it more local. That will be like my answers to those three.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else?
So we have in chat, Meriah, CM Canela, she went ahead and put her response. Do you want to come on microphone and talk about this at all, or would you prefer just to leave it in chat?
Oh, I can talk about it. I mean, there's different parts of civics education in my mind. So we have the citizenship program with Literacy Volunteers of Santa Fe, where our ESL arm works with ESL students with citizenship classes, and works with other partners throughout the community like Somos. But I work with the basic literacy students, and I feel like this is a really important area to bring in that way as well. But I work with the tutors, so I don't know how, like, that's why I put in, I'm not sure what kind of structure and content. I like that idea of local, just how to encourage students to become more involved in local issues. But since I'm working with tutors, I'm not sure how to bring that into what they do, if that makes sense.
That does, and I think that's a great question. I love how you said you work with tutors and how that can be brought in, even if you're not involved in direct instruction. And I think that's something that we can definitely explore later on. Rebecca, are you writing notes? Do you mind writing that down? Because I think I would like to revisit that as well.
Meriah, I did, and also when I talk about with the section on ESL, I'll see if I can incorporate some stuff there. Okay.
Awesome, thank you. All right, are there any other questions or any other responses?
It's not required that you participate, but we would love to hear from everybody, because we know that there's a diverse set of experiences being reflected here, and different areas that people are teaching in.
All right. Cool. Thank you all for sharing. I want to just kind of reiterate what Rebecca said, is that civics, even though we try to teach it as abroad, every community is going to be different. And so that's why we love having these webinars and open discussions, so that way we can see, hey, there's all kinds of different stuff happening around the state of New Mexico, that it's going to be different. It's going to change for everyone. So always feel free to add, or if you have questions, it's always a good time to ask them. But we're going to continue moving on. And here's a big question, and I love this question because when I presented it or when I've asked this question at one time, it's always interesting to see what kind of responses we get. So just a real broad question. What is civics education? What do you feel like it is? What is that definition that you have of civics education? Again, you can turn on your mic and ask, or you can write it down in the chat. But we're going to just give you a couple minutes if anyone would tell us what they feel like civics education is. I love the quietness. This is always the fun part. I know everyone's typing. At least I hope. That's my hope, is everyone's typing. What is civics education?
The first thing that comes to my mind is just learning how to be a strong citizen in your community. And part of that is becoming educated in how it's run, both on a local, state and national level. So it can be so many things within that.
Perfect. I love that answer. Anyone else want to just shout out or type it out? All right. So I'm going to give you the long, because this is teaching skills that matter. I'm going to give you the long definition of what TSTM has actually decided what civics education is. There we go. So civics education is education services provided to English language learners or who are adults, including professionals with degrees and credentials in their native countries, that enables such adults to achieve competencies in the English language and acquire the basic and more advanced skills needed to function effectively as parents, workers, and citizens in the United States. And we could keep on reading this and go on, but I really, really like how, I'm not sure who said it. I wasn't looking at my screen. But it is pretty much, how can we become a successful citizen? Civics, and a lot of people, I know as I have taught this, a lot of people, whenever you say civics, they automatically think of, oh, well, history. No, it's tied in some aspects, but it is not 100%. It is not history. Civics education is about the government, about how to become a successful citizen. Like, oh, I'm sorry. I wish I had my screen up to see who actually said that, but we're going to move on. So civics includes citizenship. And I think Rebecca's going to talk a little bit about it, but it's, what is it? What does it mean to become a citizen, or what does it mean to be a citizen, and how those responsibilities reflect what we expect as within our American culture. The voting process, how are we supposed to vote? What does that include? And I can't remember who was talking about this earlier about the voting boards and all of that, but the voting process is included in civics. Interpretations of the Constitution. What does the Constitution mean? Why was it written? How does it affect us now? How was it written then? How can we interpret it to both then and now? It analyzes all of the laws within the Constitution. So a further analysis of what is happening. And that can be of local or national constitutions, or local or national laws, anything like that. It's analyzing them to understand what they mean, or how they reflect and connect to what is happening within your community and local economy. Government types and process. So this goes beyond like, what are all the government processes, and then figuring out how it connects to a smaller basis and how it connects to you, which is all really, really good. And a lot of our students do not realize how important this is. They just kind of go by whatever they hear and they don't realize the process. So this is very important. Elections and the voting process. One of my favorite things to teach is, how does this work? And I know I have voting process on there again, but those elections, there's always a deeper aspect of that we can go into. And then citizens' basics, rights, and responsibilities. A a lot of times, I know in my classrooms, I've had students, we've gone over a lot of like the First Amendment, especially, and they don't realize what it means, and they just use it kind of willy-nilly until we actually sit down and like break it apart into sections and ideas. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize that's what it meant. Oh, I didn't realize that's what I could do or I couldn't do, or how that interpreted, or when they start reflecting on the real or the wider world, and they're like, oh, that's why people got in trouble here, or that's why they didn't get in trouble here, was that. So it's really interesting when they start seeing what their individual rights and responsibilities are. And then navigating the governmental systems. What can they do? What can't they do? How should they do it? And knowing, especially when we start looking at like ESL students, and I'm taking over Rebecca's part. You're welcome, Rebecca. But what can you do if an ESL student is not documented? They still have certain rights and they still have certain responsibilities that they have to fulfill, or there's certain things that they think just because they came here, and even though they're legal, they don't realize that they still have all of those freedoms and liberties that that others have. So how can we navigate through the governmental systems in order to get the most out of where we live, out of our community, out of our societies? So we're going to break this up into two parts. I'm going to talk about the HSC, why and how I teach civics. So I'm going to go first with the why. One of the things that I thought was really, really interesting is when we're teaching HSC, and this is all from the GED website. So if you are teaching HiSET, they're somewhat similar. So, but on the GED test, 50% of that social studies test is civics and government. So why do I teach it? It's because it's one of the biggest things that is going to be asked on the test. So for our HSC students, we heavily rely on the civics and government aspect of all of our teachings, just because, like I said, it's the biggest thing that comes on the test, but it's going to be the thing that most impacts their daily lives. It's not just about teaching for a test, although I know that's usually our HSC students' biggest fear is like, when can I finish the test? That's not necessarily the case, but it's how can this go beyond the test into my personal life? So the HSC test talks about the ability to read and understand text and those problem solving abilities. And like I said, we focus heavily on the civics. As you can see, history is only about 20%, economics is 15%, and geography is 15%. So it's really, really important that we give them all of it, but when we're really trying to target those skills, sometimes it's important to focus back on those civics and government. So how do I teach it? Now, one of my favorite things is always bringing up a civics topic. And so again, this is separating that history, that US history, from the civics or the geography. I know I love geography, and my students always laugh at me because I go off on wild tangents on how to use graphs or how to use maps and all of that, but it's separating those topics to focus on a civics. So that's a voting. I think one of my favorite is like the First Amendment, or just finding any sort of amendment, any sort of law, the Bill of Rights. I create that main topic and I present it to them just as a big, broad idea. And then I always bring an essential skill. Now, again, if you have watched any of our TSTM lessons, we have talked about essential skills. So we're not going to dive too much into that, but I always bring up an essential skill as well as an associated skill, which would be like making inferences, drawing conclusions, as well as critical thinking or adaptability and willingness to learn. Like there's a lot of different skills. I always bring two of them, an essential skill and associated skill, that I can show them, all right, this is how we can learn it. This is how you'll interpret reading, but let's also connect it to a real life application, which is my last one. I always find a practical activity. Now, civics is one of those things where I hear a lot of students say, oh, but it's so boring. Why do I have to learn this? It was an old document, especially when we're talking about the Constitution. That's probably my favorite. It was such an old document. It doesn't matter anymore. But it's bringing it down to their level, making it relative to what they are trying to do, or what they are seeing in their everyday lives. So like I said, one of my favorite, and maybe I'll talk about it a little bit later, but it's always bringing it the topic, a skill, and practicality, excuse me. If you don't make it practical, if you don't make it relative to them, it's just going to go over their heads and they're not going to feel connected to it. They live and breathe civics every day. It's something that they do on a constant basis. They're part of society. Even just driving down the road, you know, if they have a driver's license, they have to follow the rules. They have to know their rights, their responsibilities, simple things like that that they don't take into consideration. When elections are coming up, we like to do activities where we actually see, you know, where do you stand? Are you just standing because your family has, or are there other things that you want to, that you support, that you don't realize you might have a different view than your family? It's always about bringing it back to their level and bringing it to an area where they can understand it. All right, and I'm going to stop talking because otherwise I'm going to start bumping into Rebecca's part, and I don't want to do that. She might get on to me later. No, but I'm going to go ahead and we're going to switch over to the ESL side.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about ESL, and since the question has been brought up about literacy tutoring, I'm going to touch on that as well. Before I do that, there's a couple things I want to kind of add to the conversation. First, I'd like to know just a little bit more about our audience. So if you don't mind putting in the chat what area you teach or work in, that would be really excellent for us, because then we have a good sense of like who we're talking to. If you don't mind that, just go ahead and type that in the chat. Okay, so I see HSE. I've already heard that one person coordinates a basic literacy tutoring program. ESL. And some quiet people. Okay. All right, Carrie, I got your name now. Thanks. Okay, and I see we have a math teacher, which is very interesting. Bill teaches math, I think. You teach math, right, Bill?
I do. Yep.
All righty, excellent. Okay. I think we've heard. Cynthia, yes, go ahead.
Yes, I don't know where to tap. I can't find it, but I am here at the Women's Correctional Facility in Grants, and I teach high set.
High set, perfect. Cynthia, on your screen, hopefully you should be able to see a chat button near the bottom right. But sometimes it's in a different place if you're using a phone or a different type of computer system. So you may be able to see it there. I'm not sure.
I can't see it, but
It
it's
doesn't
okay.
show for you?
Mm-hmm.
I'll
Okay.
add it to the chat.
Oh,
All right.
Okay, I think let me see. What
right.
icon is it?
That's okay. You can go
Okay.
ahead. The chat is just another form of us to communicate as a group. So that's no problems. You can just participate through your microphone. That's great. Perfect.
I'm
Okay,
sorry, I
excellent.
don't have camera too, so you can't see.
Right, because you're at corrections. I know, they're very strict. It's all good. Okay, no problems. Perfect. All right, so I think we've got some answers, at least from many of the people who are here today. So it looks like we have kind of a bit of a range. And I wanted to talk a little bit about civics in relation to ESL. And I also want to talk about civics in relation to TSTM. So in the TSTM structure, we talk about different components of the program. We talk about critical skills, which help people in learning, in education, and in the workplace. And then we talk about these 5 topic areas. And civics is the first of the 5 topic areas. And these have been identified, as Meriah said earlier, as some of the topics that really are key information for our adult learners to grasp, okay? So here in civics, when we think about it, you know, when Meriah and I were first, and Bill were first sitting down and planning this webinar, Meriah was like, had all these ideas about the way we teach civics with relation to the GED or the high set. And I said, but what do we do for ESL? And so we thought for a moment, but the reality is that civics is an integral part of ESL teaching. Okay. Also, it's one of our most fun curriculum areas, I believe, and that's a personal opinion. But so why do we teach civics in our ESL classes? Why do we integrate civics into our ESL classes? Some programs for their ESL or as a part of their ESL are using money from EL Civics grants, and those are now called IELCE. And I'm not going to pretend that I believe it's Integrated English Language and Civics Education, but don't quote me hard on that one. All right. So those grants use the definition that we had at the beginning as a component of, you know, what is the work you're supposed to accomplish on that grant. And as they mentioned, that includes helping English learners participate more fully in the community as parents, workers, and citizens. So it's a really broad definition of citizenship in the EL Civics grants. The second reason why we need to consider civics content, and this is whether you are an EL Civics program or are not an EL Civics program, it doesn't matter, is that if you review our assessments, particularly the CASAS test, you will find numerous questions that relate to civics content. One of my least favorite examples on the CASAS test is there are some very specific questions related to the court system, where they're asking students to understand the vocabulary of the court system to be successful on those items. And that is truthfully vocabulary that students do not learn unless it is directly taught to them, because it's not stuff we encounter. Summons is not a word we encounter on an everyday basis, generally, unless we're lawyers or paralegals. So there's that piece of it. If your program does not use CASAS and uses a different assessment, I did a bit of research in looking at how it works on TAPE Class E, and more of their questions are related to when we mention navigating governmental systems. So that's things like, how do you get your driver's license? That's a governmental system, you know, and so that's another component of civics education. And as I'm mentioning these, I think you're probably thinking through, if your program has a purchased ESL curriculum, the ways that that stuff is already incorporated into our texts, because it is quite frequently. These questions in the assessments, like I said, they require that vocabulary knowledge, and so it tends to be incorporated into our textbooks. The next thing is to think about is that civics is about understanding rights, responsibilities, systems, and norms in a new country. And this is particularly for your immigrant and refugee learner, right? They have come to the United States. Some people have, 10, 20 years in the United States, but other people do not. Other people are here, they've just recently come into the US. And so this component of teaching and learning allows the students to get more information about what are the expectations in US society. One place where I find this a lot with my students, and I'll talk more about it in a moment, is responsibilities at school. The US school system has a high degree of expectation for parental involvement in comparison with some other countries. And it's a specific type of parental involvement. It goes beyond simply paying your tuition and having the correct clothing and supplies for your child. There's other things they're expecting you to do. And honestly, parents do get judged by the school system if they don't do those things. So the civics education, going back to helping students to be more involved as parents, it's involvement on the ranking of the US system, okay? And then finally, the other reason that civics is really important for our ESL learners is that a number of them are in the process of working on their citizenship. And the content between civics and citizenship, there's huge overlap there. Meriah showed you some of that content earlier. Something like a First Amendment lesson, that's directly applicable to the citizenship test. Knowing your governmental representatives and the different layers of government, levels of government in the United States, exactly applicable to the citizenship test. So when I look at my how, the ways that I tend to teach or incorporate civics into my classes. One, it's a perfect opportunity for problem-based learning. So what I'm talking about when I'm saying that is that you bring a problem to class and the students have to sort out using English and possibly using English written materials, how they might resolve that type of a problem. A typical problem that falls under civics would be, how does someone who has recently arrived in your community enroll their child in school? That's a number of steps that you're going to have to take. A lot of those steps involve being able to read and follow directions and being able to produce the documents that you're asked for. And that's navigating a governmental system. So that would be one example. Another way that I have incorporated civics in my classes is that if any of you have taught, it usually shows up in the higher levels of the ESL textbooks. There's often a lesson about volunteerism. And so that is a perfect opportunity to extend the textbook content and start looking at how your students can become more involved in the community. That community involvement is another aspect of civics. So when I've done this with my students, for example, after we read the article where there's the example student who has, become a community volunteer with an organization, I send my students out to research different organizations in the community that accept volunteers, and then they do short presentations explaining the type of the organization, the like their mission and their services, and what volunteers do within that organization. And then that activity gives students two really important takeaways. One, if they're able and eligible, volunteering is a great opportunity to use your English in real life setting. And two, students often bring in information about resource organizations from our community that might serve the needs of other families in the class. Okay, like they might bring in information about different immigrant rights organizations, for example. So then the whole class learns that content too. So that's a great way to incorporate civics, like a civics lesson into your class that's directly relevant to your community and takes it outside of this hypothetical that's in the book. The kind of last comment I have about integrating civics in ESL is this. As an instructor, and Carrie, also for your tutors, this is really, really key. People need to be clear and accurate about how citizens and non-citizens can participate, because voter registration is not an ideal activity in a lot of ESL classes. Non-citizens cannot register to vote. And if they do attempt to register to vote, there can be negative consequences on them if they try to get citizenship later. So you need to be clear about the differences, but you don't have to like divide your class up between these are the citizens, these are the non-citizens. You just kind of put it out there in this general sense, and also make sure you know the ways that non-citizens are able to participate. Non-citizens, for example, can write to government officials. That's entirely within the realm of what rights and responsibilities non-citizens have in the United States. What response they get is a different question, but they can make their voice heard. And if you have questions about this, and particularly enforcement is different in different communities. So it's always ideal if you have questions about this to try and get in touch with someone in your community who's a reputable local immigration service provider. Sometimes those are nonprofits, like it's going to slip my mind, but there's one, New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, for example. In some communities, Catholic Charities also runs some immigration services. And so you can always check in with them to ask those questions. And some of this information is available on the internet too, like what citizens and non-citizens can do differently. But just be clear about that and be fair to your students, because you don't want to set them up for a bad situation. And Carrie, I want to touch a little bit because you brought the question about tutors. So one thing about incorporating this with your tutors is this piece of information, making sure that they don't give bad advice to students. And then I think another thing in looking at this with tutors is there's a lot of one-on-one type tutoring activities and lessons that are things like, how do you access services? How do you get a driver's license, for example? And that's a perfect opportunity for integrating civics into the tutoring setting. So hopefully that touches a little bit on what you were asking for. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I want to introduce you to a resource. So in TSTM, which is the Teaching the Skills That Matter, there are lesson plans for each of the 5 content areas. And this link will bring you to the website. Thank you. Thank you so much, Meriah. Is that Meriah or Bill? I'm not sure who pulled that up for me. It's one of them. All right. So, and the link is in the chat as well for you to find it. And so this page contains the civics education component of TSTM. And what there is a set of, I believe it's 5 different lesson plans. These are all inclusive. They have everything you would need in order to carry out that lesson plan in your classroom. They also indicate information about the level, the type of content, whether it's more HSE or more ESL. They have information about what standards are applied in that lesson. So these are great lessons to incorporate into your classroom. One that we've done a couple presentations on is the First Amendments one. First Amendment. There's only one First Amendment. Okay, I can count. This is why I don't teach math. So that one is a really good lesson plan for looking at in-depth, looking at the First Amendment. And it's primarily designed for ESL students, although I could see some scenarios where you might use it with some of the lower level, more like an ABE student. Probably, I don't know so much about an HSE student, but more like an ABE student. I don't know, Meriah, have you done it with HSE?
I actually primarily do this activity with my HSE students.
Okay.
I modify it for my ESL since they don't know a whole lot. I take the same concepts and adapt it to work with the Constitution, like the preamble, and do similar activities with it. So it is adaptable. But I work a lot with my HSE students with this lesson plan.
Great. And again, Carrie, when you were asking about incorporating this into tutoring, these are like some ready-made lesson plans that some of them require a larger group to carry out, but they could easily be adapted by your tutors to use in a tutoring setting as well. Okay. It's a very extensive lesson, and each of the 5 is created in the same way. So you're going to see things. It even includes things like you can see up there real quickly, the adaptions and accommodations. So this is how you can make this work if you have more of a multi-level class. All right. Thank you, Meriah. I think we're ready to take a look at the next slide then. All right, so what our question to you then is, what is one new way that you would like to incorporate civics into your next teaching term? And so we can have, do we want to do this as breakout rooms and just have people share in pairs, or do we want to just have people share out to the large group? What do you guys think?
We can do a share and pair.
Okay, so we're going to have people pair up then?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go ahead then and make breakout rooms for you guys so that you can partner with another teacher who is here. And maybe if this is going to let me do it. I don't know that I have the ability to do the breakout rooms.
I'll get it right quick.
Okay, great.
Okay, everyone should be going out into the breakout room, and we'll give you how long? 5 minutes?
Yep.
Okay. All right, you should be getting your breakout rooms now.
All right. I think that we have got, oh, I lost my video now. Such is the way of breakout rooms. When you come back, everything has to be reset. Okay. All right. New ideas. Who had something great that they want to share? We're excited.
I was talking about how I want to try on each of the teaching skills that matter areas, trying to do time limited classes, like 6-week long classes for students to join.
Okay.
Using the
Doing it as a small group.
but adapt, yeah, and see how that goes.
Right. And it's so much fun to teach a small group. I mean, that's one of the great advantages of a tutoring program is that you have that opportunity.
I actually love that idea. So I'm going to kind of jump right in here. I know we are developing 4-week tutoring sessions we have about 28 students that are partial passers right now. And so we are trying to develop 4-week like boot camps. And I had never thought about using some of these ready-made lessons. So I'm glad you brought that up as far as like a tutoring, because we were trying to navigate. So I think I might steal your idea and run with it.
Let me know how it goes for you.
Sounds good. I will.
And this is why we have webinars, so that we can learn from everybody. Other ideas, other thoughts that you came up with, how you want to incorporate this into your practice coming in the next term? There was one thing that I mentioned in the small group that I was with, and I am going to share this because I think we may have more than one math teacher here. I am almost certain that the Flint water crisis lesson plan that's on the TSTM website has a math component to it, or you could build a math component with that one because it's talking about the water issues in Michigan. So there's a lot of space for data and statistics there if you want to look at that. Also, you can use that if you're teaching HSE science. So just to consider. Anybody else who would like to share? Okay, why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide then, please? This slide is questions. Again, if anybody wants to question, to put out any questions or any comments, we would love to hear them.
Not necessarily a question, but thank you very much for doing this. I am definitely gonna take a look at those lesson plans and try to implement a couple of them.
Great.
Every semester, I guess.
Yeah, tell us how it goes. We are going to be doing next week. We're going to do our like kind of workshop, and anytime that teachers want to come in and drop in on our workshop days, which are the third Thursday, 12 to 1 of each month, we'd love to hear how it's going for you, and you can give us some feedback.
All right.
Yeah, can you tell us more about what happens in the workshop one?
The one that's coming up next week or the cohort? Which one?
I think that the one on the, like, I was looking at the content page, and so there was a webinar and then there's a workshop for each topic.
Yeah, the workshop.
Mhm.
So the next workshop that we have next week, we're specifically, we're going to take some time to run through and answer questions about what's coming up in the TSTM cohort training. Our TSTM cohort training is basically like the full training of teaching skills that matter, and then that will be starting in February. So we want to take the opportunity to answer any questions and go through that with people. We are also, during that workshop time, really opening it up to teachers because we want to give you an opportunity to talk about your experiences in trying TSTM, or to talk about your questions and how you might implement TSTM in your specific teaching context. So it's kind of an open format. It's more of people bring questions and we go through the questions that people are bringing.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments that people have?
So I think if no one has any questions, I think we could wrap up then.
I think you are correct, Meriah. I really want to thank you guys for taking your time, spending your lunchtime with us. This is our contact information as the members of the TSTM training, and the entire toolkit of lesson plans. This is the link right here. All right, Carla, what's your question? I'm sorry.
She's typing it.
Yep. Meriah or Bill, if you want to, while Carla's typing her question, could you put the TSTM link into the chat because it's easier for people to get it that way? The lesson plan, the whole thing,
Oh, okay.
just that copy of that. I can't pull it off your slide when I'm
I
not.
can't either. So.
While we're waiting for her question, I'm going to go ahead and just pull up the TSTM DELT page. We're going to fill it a little bit while we're waiting for that. The cohort that we're talking about is coming up. So if you would like to, I'm going to put this link in the chat as well. You can come and you can register here. We are going to be starting that here in February. So if you would like to just take some time to read through this, register. If you are on the teacher listservs, you should have gotten this from Tina. So if you haven't gotten it, I'm going to put this link into the chat as well so that y'all can take a look and see if it's something you would like to participate in. And
Okay. So Carla got her question into the chat and it says, do you try to practice interacting by doing things like mock court cases and juries? So I can speak to that as an ESL teacher. I have not done that specifically, although I have done some role plays and a little bit of what you might call performance art, especially when I was teaching citizenship with lower level ESL students. I had them act out some of the activities of the founding fathers so that they could keep straight who was who. In essence, we had a fake duel in our classroom so that they could remember who Alexander Hamilton was. But no, Carla, I think that is a really good idea, and possibly Bill or Meriah can speak more to that. I don't think there is a TSTM lesson specifically for that, but in the cohort, we're going to be teaching people how to design their own TSTM lessons.
So I don't, same as Rebecca, I don't believe that there is a lesson specifically for that. However, I do have a brilliant teacher on our staff who has actually reenacted, so to speak, a court case. It got very, very heated and it was a very good discussion, but it really helped them to understand the process of a court and how it was supposed to respond and really change some of the things. So it's definitely something that is possible. But as far as a TSTM lesson, there's no activity for it. But like Rebecca said, it's definitely something that you could make and you could incorporate into your lessons.
And I haven't done that exact thing, but we do some role playing with job interviewing, which a lot of students appreciate. Gets them prepared for the workforce.
All right. Thank you for your question, Carla. Obviously, it leads to some ideas and discussion. Are there any other questions anybody else has? Or Carla, again, that's fine. All right, that is basically our wrap up. Next week, like I said, at 12 o'clock on Thursday, we're going to do an overview of the cohort and answer any questions related to that. We're also happy to discuss anything that anybody has got if they've been trying out TSTM in their classroom. And then the cohort is coming up starting in February, and we've been sending some information about that, and there will probably be some updates to that information coming out next week as well. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.